The line was dead, but the nightmare was just beginning. "We have your daughter," the voice had said, a cold digital whisper from a number that would never be traced. $1 million, or you will never see her again. For a frantic week, the Li family in Kuala Lumpur negotiated, begged, and scrambled for funds, their lives narrowing to the terrifying glow of a smartphone screen. They sent half. The demands only grew more violent, more specific, and then the messages stopped. The silence that followed was more horrifying than any threat. This wasn't a lone kidnapper. It was a machine, a factory of misery operating with chilling efficiency from a place lawlessness had claimed as its own, the war-torn, jungle-choked borderlands of Myanmar. Their daughter, Mei Lin, a bright and ambitious 28-year-old accountant, had simply vanished into the digital ether, one of countless victims of a vast, shadowy empire built on lies, extortion, and brutal, industrial-scale crime. This is the story not of a single act of evil, but of an entire family business dedicated to it, the Ming Syndicate. Mei Lin was the kind of person who lit up a room without trying. Photographs show a young woman with a warm, easy smile, her eyes crinkling at the corners, always standing a little closer to her friends, an arm slung around a shoulder. She was meticulous, the sort who color-coded her spreadsheets and remembered everyone's birthday. She had taken a job with a seemingly legitimate marketing firm in Bangkok, lured by the promise of international experience and a generous salary. Her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Li, were initially wary. It seemed too good to be true, her father would later testify, his voice a hollow echo in a courtroom. The flight was paid for, the apartment was provided. They sent glossy brochures. We should have listened to our guts. The company was a front, a sophisticated lure cast by the Ming family's sprawling network. Mei Lin's flight to Thailand was the last time her family saw her in person. Within days of her arrival, she and a dozen other new recruits were bundled into vans, their passports confiscated, and driven across the porous border into Myanmar, into a compound known only as the Garden, a cruel irony for a place that was in reality a high-tech prison. The Garden was the brainchild and personal fiefdom of Arthur Ming, the patriarch. He wasn't a thug from the streets. He was a wolf in a bespoke suit. In his late 50s, with silver-flecked hair and a calm, almost avuncular demeanor, Ming presented himself as a visionary entrepreneur. He spoke of disrupting industries, of leveraging the chaos of the border region into opportunity. To the outside world, he was a philanthropist, donating to local clinics in the Myanmar town his syndicate effectively owned. But behind the fortified walls of the Garden, he was a god-king. His empire rested on 3 pillars: a call center the size of a warehouse, a sprawling online casino platform, and a crypto finance operation to launder the staggering profits. The call center was the heart of the scam. Hundreds, sometimes thousands, of mostly young trafficked men and women from across Asia sat in cramped cubicles, their every move monitored by armed guards. They worked from scripts, posing as Interpol agents, Chinese police, or investment brokers, their voices a relentless drone of manufactured urgency. They would call targets across the globe, weaving elaborate tales of frozen bank accounts, fabricated criminal charges, and once-in-a-lifetime financial opportunities. The psychological manipulation was refined to a science, a brutal symphony of fear and greed conducted over fiber optic cables. Arthur's children were not just his heirs. They were the syndicate's executive board. His eldest son, Michael Ming, was the COO, a tech-savvy and ruthlessly ambitious man in his 30s who optimized the scam operations with the cold precision of a Silicon Valley executive. He tracked conversion rates, A/B tested the scam scripts, and implemented a system of performance-based incentives for the trafficked workers, bonuses for successful extortions, brutal punishments for failure. Then there was his daughter, Evelyn Ming. If Michael was the brain, Evelyn was the steel fist. She was a stark contrast to her brother's corporate chill. In her 20s, with a piercing gaze and a reputation for volatility, She was often seen patrolling the compound, a pistol on her hip, her temper as feared as any guard's baton. She personally oversaw discipline, and it was her name that the workers whispered in terror. The investigation would later reveal she took a personal, sadistic pleasure in the power she wielded. For months, the international investigation into the missing persons, not just Mei Lin, but dozens from Malaysia, Thailand, China, and even further afield, had hit wall after wall. The Myanmar military junta, which controlled the region, was either complicit or impotent, their officials likely on the Ming payroll. Tips led to dead ends. The digital trail was a masterclass in obfuscation, bouncing through servers from Cyprus to the Cayman Islands. The case was a sprawling, frustrating puzzle with no edges. The break came from the most unlikely of places: a single, corrupted audio file. A humanitarian group working with refugees fleeing the conflict zone had been given a cheap, battered smartphone by a young man who had escaped a similar compound. On it, amidst photos and garbled messages, was a voice memo. The quality was poor, filled with the static of a poor connection and the distant, frantic tapping of keyboards. But the words were clear. A young woman's voice, trembling with exhaustion and fear, whispered in Mandarin, "My name is Mei Lin Li. They are holding us in a place called the Garden, near the river, the Ming family. They are killing people. Please, tell my mother I love—" The recording cut off abruptly, replaced by the sound of a door slamming open and a sharp female voice snarling, "Who are you talking to, you stupid bitch?" The subsequent sounds were unspeakable. That voice, investigators were certain, belonged to Evelyn Ming. The audio file was a seismic shock, transforming the case from a series of missing person reports into a potential homicide investigation. It gave authorities a name, the Garden, and a family, the Mings. International pressure on the Myanmar junta intensified, backed by the threat of crippling sanctions. Reluctantly, a joint raid was approved. The footage, later released to the public, was as surreal as it was horrifying. As Myanmar commandos and international agents breached the compound's main gate, they didn't find a war zone. They found an office. Rows of young people in cheap headsets stared back, their faces pale with a mixture of fear and strange relief. Computers flickered with scripts and fake profiles, but the illusion of normalcy shattered as they pushed deeper. In the basement, they found the punishment rooms. The stench of sweat, blood, and bleach was overwhelming. There were shackles bolted to the floor, waterboarding stations, and crude medical kits for patching up victims just enough to return them to their scamming terminals. And then, in a locked storage container on the edge of the property, they made the discovery that would define the case. 14 bodies, in various states of decomposition, stacked like cordwood. They had been starved, tortured, or worked to death. The Garden had become a graveyard. The arrest of the Ming family was a spectacle. Arthur Ming was taken from his luxury villa, his suit still immaculate, a faint, condescending smile playing on his lips as if he were merely inconvenienced by a minor business dispute. Michael was apprehended at the airport, a one-way ticket to Dubai in his hand and a briefcase containing 5 passports and a ledger of encrypted crypto wallets. Evelyn put up a violent fight, screaming and spitting at the officers before being subdued. The evidence against them was mountainous: financial records, witness statements from freed workers, and the damning audio of Evelyn's voice on that fateful recording. The trial was a global media sensation, a stark portrayal of modern evil. The prosecution laid out a case of slavery, torture, and murder for profit on an epic scale. They presented spreadsheets that calculated the lifetime value of a trafficked worker versus the cost of their food and shelter. They showed how the scam had netted over $100 million in just 2 years. The Mings, once a picture of united power, began to fracture under the weight of the evidence. Arthur remained stoic, a sphinx refusing to acknowledge the court's authority. Michael, ever the strategist, tried to cut a deal, offering to testify against his father in exchange for leniency, painting himself as a mere employee following orders. But the trial's true turning point, its shattering climax, came during Evelyn's testimony. For days, she had been a coiled spring of defiance, glaring at the prosecutors, her answers short and dripping with contempt. The prosecution saved their most powerful weapon for last. They called a survivor, a young woman named Som, who had been in the cell next to Mei Lin. Som, her voice barely a whisper, identified Evelyn as the woman who had stormed into Mei Lin's cell after the recording was discovered. She described in graphic, horrifying detail what happened next. The beating, the threats, and then the final, chilling order. She said, "This one is more trouble than she's worth. Take her to the quiet room." We never saw Mei Lin again. As Som spoke, Evelyn's mask of cold control began to crack. A vein throbbed in her temple. When the prosecutor turned to her and asked simply, "Why, Evelyn? Why did you have to kill her?" Something in her snapped. She lunged forward, her hands slamming on the desk, her face a contorted mask of rage. "She was weak," Evelyn shrieked, her voice tearing through the stunned silence of the courtroom. "They are all weak. They come for easy money and they can't even follow simple rules. She betrayed the family, my family, and you don't betray family. You protect it. I was protecting my father's legacy." In that one unhinged outburst, the carefully constructed facade of a business empire crumbled, revealing the raw, violent tribalism at its core. It was a confession, not just to a murder, but to a twisted, all-consuming ideology. Arthur Ming was sentenced to life imprisonment for a litany of charges, including murder, human trafficking, and racketeering. Michael received a 40-year sentence, his deal granting him a sliver of mercy he did not deserve. Evelyn, convicted on multiple counts of murder, was also given a life term, her fury now caged within a prison cell. The sentences brought a form of justice, a closing of a ledger. But for the families of the 14 souls found in that container, and for the hundreds of other survivors scarred by their time in the garden, it was a hollow victory. The Ming Syndicate was dismantled, but the conditions that allowed it to flourish, the lawless zones, the desperation, the insatiable greed of the digital age, remain. The story of Mei Lin and the Ming family is a stark 21st-century parable, a reminder that the most terrifying monsters no longer lurk in the shadows, but build their kingdoms in plain sight, operating behind the sleek, impersonal interface of a screen. In the end, the most valuable thing they stole wasn't money, but the very thing their victims believed they were working for: a future. Some monsters don't hide in the dark, they build their empires in the blinding light of day. If stories like this keep you hooked, hit subscribe for more.